All right. So thank you. Thank you everyone for coming, and then especially Professor Michael Hudson. Thank you so much for being here. It's a real honor to have you here. Your work has been so influential in providing a foundation for the kind of argument that David Graeber makes in Debt. He owes you quite a debt. Your work, Super-Imperialism, figures prominently in the chapter the final chapter of the book, the one that we're looking at this week. And so it's just so wonderful having you here. One of the things that has been so great about your work is that you're an economist who is able to speak from the position of the economics profession. And so you've spent, though your career has focused on radical political economy, you've worked from within the institutions of the apparatus of super-imperialism. And so you're able to know the economy better than the so-called wizards of the economy. And your own reading of Federal Reserve data is able to show the hypocrisy of the Fed's own policies using their own language. And so the work that you've done in exposing how super-imperialism and how the financialization of debt has taken over industry is really monumental in laying the groundwork for the final chapter of Debt. And your work, many of us in this group, we know your work, and we know of the trilogy that you're working on with your most recent book, The Collapse of Antiquity, coming out, and of course that being volume 2, your first being And Forgive Them Their Debt. I want to give a little background, just if I may, if you indulge me, if you may indulge me for a moment. I want to kind of go back to some of your early work, because you wrote back in, I want to say March or August 1972, you wrote some articles. Well, you wrote Super-Imperialism, what became Super-Imperialism, only months after Richard Nixon went off the gold standard. And that work that you produced is still incredibly relevant today, because you were able to really predict the kind of financialization of the manufacturing and industrial world that we see going on. And you were right there to witness the kinds of I'll use the term innovations in a more Schumpeterian kind of way. You were able to notice the innovations as they were happening, and were able to predict these long-term economic trends that, of course, now through your institute, that you're being able to develop a strong degree of prescience in knowing where these trends are playing themselves out. So you got your start back in the 1960s, studying balance of payments, and then went on in 1968 to get a PhD in economics. I believe you studied with Robert Heilbronner.
Absolutely not.
Oh,
I never studied with him. It's not possible to study with Bob Heilbronner because he has nothing to teach.
Oh, okay. Okay, I thought that maybe you had worked with him as a way to try to counteract some of his work, because by the 1970s, his work had gone a different direction from yours. So that's a nice correction.
It never was. He never wanted me at the new school, and he really wanted me to leave. He was a Stalinist, and he ran the department in a Stalinist way. and I had nothing at all to do with him. He hated the fact that I worked with the Catholic Church on land reform. He said there were too many poor people in the world, and he hated the fact that I criticized the World Bank's move to cut back population control to the population levels. Everything we on almost everything we disagreed. It was professors at the new school who wanted to hear what I had to say about copper futures, copper pricing in the metals market, that they could use for consulting they were doing with the World Bank, that led them to hire me, and for international trade. And I know that you're trying to compliment me by saying I'm an economist, but I haven't spoken to economists for the last 50 years. Already in 1972, I remember I talked to, decided to call myself a futurist, that meant anything you want it to mean. But whatever it is, I'm not an economist who says you have to get rich by making other people poor and get rich off them. Basically, that's why they give Nobel Prizes for. So I realized that I couldn't fit anything that I was interested in into the new school curriculum, where I was teaching from 1969 to 1972. When Heilbronner said, I wasn't professional. And then I realized he's absolutely right. I'm not a professional economist. I'm a futurist, or I'm a historian, or a failed orchestra conductor, but not an economist. So just to set the record straight on that. And as a matter of fact, I've been asked by some presidential candidates here to put together a group of economists and advisors. And I spoke to my friends in other countries, and we couldn't think of any American economists even to put on the group. So, that's a real problem. I think we need a name for a new discipline, and I don't know what to call it. David was an anthropologist, and I was part officially for 25 years of Harvard's anthropology department, doing my the 5 colloquia I did on ancient economics and debt cancellation. And you could say I'm an anthropologist, but then I remembered the joke in the early 1960s when people would say they'd be suspicious of somebody as a government agent. And the joke was, is he FBI or is he an anthropologist? Meaning CAA. So I didn't want to use that. We just need another term, and maybe you guys can think of one.
Yeah, housekeeper is one we like. We like the term housekeeper for the Museum of Care. This is such a great point, because the reason why I was wanting to mention your academic career, the start of your academic career, I was going to pivot to mention how, though you have economist credentials, you've worked from outside of the mainstream. And the sort of point that I was going to get to is that why David Graeber was drawn to your work was not only its brilliance, but the kind of brilliance that it often has to come from outside of the mainstream, because the people who are in the mainstream are unable to see just how complicit they are in the problems that they're supposed to be solving, but are in fact creating through means of capital accumulation. So,
well, actually, the way that we first got in touch was he emailed me and wanted to talk about Karl Polanyi and what I thought about Polanyi. And I think we both have gone way beyond what Polanyi said, but Polanyi certainly made a good point in being against the commodification of money, commodification of land, and commodification of labor, and saying they're not commodities. So, that really is how we got together. And we didn't talk too much about what I was actually writing on debt cancellation. And when his book came out, people began to say, I should really be worried somebody's stolen all of my ideas. Here's somebody, they beat me to the punch. And actually, he and I had talked about this, and I knew he was writing the popular book, and I didn't think anyone would pay attention to the idea of debt cancellation, the role of debt, until I'd got absolute agreement with the Assyriological profession and the Egyptologists and the Assyriologists that debt cancellation really worked. And Dave cut right through all of this, and he went right to the public. And he's absolutely right. And it was David that created really the public reception for what I'm doing. And it was the greatest catalyst there possibly could have been, including he got me to his literary agent. And we had the same publisher in Germany, very nice advances for German translations of our books. And it was very fortuitous. It really was a dovetailing of two different approaches. He was really a man of the people, and when we'd have lunch at the university place in New York, I'd walk back toward the subway, and there'd be usually a crowd of his the 1%, we're the 99% supporters, and he would literally melt into the crowd, just totally melt immediately into it. And he just had a wonderful ability to talk to people that people with a left-wing background like I have are totally unable to talk to any people except members of our own cult usually. So he was just great as an organizer for all of that. And it was, but it was, our approaches dovetailed. That,
I'm curious. The Super-Imperialism, the first edition came out, I think in August or September 1972, right?
In October.
October.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about how so when the book came out, I went back and read reviews of it, because it's such a path-breaking work that it wasn't until decades later that it really got the attention that it deserved. And it really was prescient in making this argument that at the time few economists were making. And so the work itself was, my sense is that it was so ahead of its time that it was misunderstood. Is that accurate?
No, already in around 1964, 65, I think I mentioned it, Chase Manhattan and my friends on Wall Street, every Friday, we would wait until 2 or 3 o'clock, and the Federal Reserve would publish its figures on the gold cover for the dollar. And we were projecting it, and we could all see at what point is the dollar going to be forced off gold. And I wrote an article for the West Coast paper Ramparts on the sieve of gold, saying that we're going to have to go off gold. It was obvious that the Vietnam War was going to push everybody off, would push the dollar off gold. So I think everybody sort of knew it, but it wasn't talked about in polite company. Fortunately, I never made it into polite company, because I didn't have a sense of what clothes to wear and all the identifying things that you need to join them. But my group of fellow economists with a Marxist background, and you almost needed a Marxist background to have a good job on Wall Street, because if you went to a business school, you think everybody's trying to help everybody else out, and at least the Marxists know that it's all about exploitation, and that really helps you lead into what's happening where. So we'd get together and we'd talk about it, and so I had written about it 2 years before. I talked to the Catholic Church about it when they were helping me criticize American foreign aid and support what at that time was a progressive liberation theology. And actually, around that time, Super-Imperialism came out. The good Pope, John Paul I, was going to fund, the Vatican was going to start an Academy of Geoeconomics. I thought up the term, but it would have been in Tulane, Louisiana, and I was to head it. And unfortunately, he didn't live very long. He drank poisoned milk a few days after he made that decision, and then we got the two popes from hell. And so much for any thought of a papal encyclical on debt cancellation for the time being. But at the time, we were all sort of anticipating it, and because I'd anticipated it and thought it through, as soon as it happened, I was able to come quickly out and write the whole book. I'd already published some of the chapters. One of the chapters in the first book that was published of mine, which was by the Catholics, on the myth of aid, one of the chapter on the IMF and the World Bank, from the Columbian Journalism Review, where a Maoist student had convinced them to run my article. And so I'd actually done a lot of the preparatory work for the book. And I didn't have an agent. I simply mailed in the manuscript to a publishing company. And it got read by an associate editor who'd gone to school with a Stalinist and thought that the book would sell. And the first reviewer was by a twit who'd worked, economics professor who'd worked for the World Bank and had been nagging me at Chase for years. Can I help him with the price of copper? So that he could write about Chile for the World Bank. And I just didn't have time to do the work for him so that he could put it under his name for the research that I did, and never answered him. And so he wrote the first review in a big magazine. I'm blocking it out where it was right now, but it was a big magazine, and they had cartoons and everything. And he said it was a hopeless travesty of what was happening. And that really helped sell the book. Because being denounced by a World Bank thug, told everybody else, hey, this is the name that must not be spoken. Let's read the book. And I got a call from Canada 2 weeks after the book was published, saying, we read the last paragraph of your book from a bank. The banker is a client of our brokerage firm, read your book, and he made $22 million. On it. Will you come and it's a long story. I ended up as a consultant for brokerage houses, and then Herman Kahn, as I wrote in the book, said that convinced me to join his institute and explain to the Defense Department how imperialism worked. So it was a how to do it book. For them, and the left wing had hardly any response at all, because they're not interested in debt or finance. They're interested in labor oppression and who's being oppressed and police brutality. And there was hardly any response at all from the left. And somebody did call Bob Heilbronner and say, "What do you think of what do you think of the book by your former economics professor there?" He said, "Well, I like Michael Hudson's book, but I can't say anything in public again about it." So that was it. He just couldn't bring himself to say anything positive about me.
That's interesting what you say about the left not really having much to say about it, because at that point in the early 1970s, at least within the humanities, the fields that I know, you're absolutely right that any attention to finance was considered to be really kind of playing for the other side, and the interest was much more in social history, labor sociology, attention to work and technology. Of course, as you remember, this would be when Harry Braverman's book was all the rage. And so you're absolutely right that your work was outside of the mainstream, in that sense, which is, I think, what has given it such longevity, because you were writing not to appease any particular trend or to try to game the tenure track game, but instead were researching trends that you had been studying for, at that point, I guess, close to a decade. And so you were already aware of the soundness of your arguments. So I'm curious, after the publication, sort of where you then took your arguments, because Super-Imperialism, how many editions is it now in? Or
well, now it's 3 editions.
3.
I think Pluto Press did they were almost broke at the time they did it, and they didn't have enough money for a proofreader or a good designer, and it was just a disaster. And so I got the rights back and I thought, as long as I'm going to correct the spelling, I might as well correct the language and add a little bit and add some sections onto it and really round it out and make it the definitive edition. I like the idea of a 3rd edition of the book being the best. Ricardo's Principles of Political Economy, the 3rd edition, is the one you want. Very often it takes 3 editions to get it right.
So I'd love to hear about the trilogy that you're working on. I know that we're going to have we're going to try to have a reading group about it, but given the scholarship that you did prior to David Graeber's death, and then the attention that was able to be given your work as a result of death, where do you see your work now? Like, what would you say are the big contributions that you are still out there making?
Well, the first is that the debts can't be paid. And so I'm working with a number of people advocating debt cancellation, and especially now because of the sanctions against Russia on the sort of World War III being prepared. It's obvious that the rising energy and food prices force global South countries to make a choice. Either they pay the US debts, dollar debts, and impose austerity, or they don't pay the debts and they put their own growth first. That's the big political fight. And I'm working with French economists or Belgian economists and others, Eric Poissant, for instance, and I are going to be publishing, I think, a book on debt cancellation soon. And I'm working with the Chinese especially to put together how this can be done with support from the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and other groups to become independent. How does the rest of the world become independent from the dollar, and with it from the dollarized debt? And the second aspect I wanted to do is I had prepared a history of economic thought, and I was teaching that at the New School using Marx's theories of surplus value. Is the main textbook. And that's what that infuriated the Marxists. They said, you're not a member of any Marxist group, only we can teach Marx. And they got Heilbronner to forbid me to talk about history of economic thought, because only a member of a political cult had the credentials to do that. And without being a member of any cult, I lacked the credentials that was needed in the left to follow this. But I have written a lot. Now, I think now that they're not teaching the history of economic thought anymore in the academic curriculum, I wanted to write, basically my own history of the main concepts, focusing on the concept of economic rent is unearned income. and extend the concept of economic rent to interest, financial charges, to the rentier economy. And almost all the work that the papers that I've been publishing in the last 2 years have been how we're not in industrial capitalism, we're in a retrogression of finance capitalism that in a way is rolling back all of the historical task of industrial capitalism to free economies from the legacy of feudalism, to free it from land rent, monopoly rent, and privatized banking, and to go back to really the same kind of rentier economy that you had under the landlords, except that now rent is for paying interest, and the role that landlords played in the 19th century has been taken over by bankers and the financial sector. So I think if I want to integrate my analysis of finance and debt with the concept of economic rent, which is basically what banks in the financial sector finance. They finance real estate and capital gains, or actual asset price gains for real estate, housing. They finance the oil and gas, natural resource mining industries, and they finance technology monopolies. And I think I want to sort of revive classical economics. So people say, you know, what am I? I was asked the other day by a British official, you know, what am I? And I said, well, I'm a classical economist. I can say I'm an economist as long as I say a classical economist, because again, that means, what is that? Nobody knows what it means. It can mean whatever I want it to mean. And basically, that's Adam Smith and the whole 19th century emphasis on value and price theory, where price is the excess of market price of economic rent in excess of the cost value. And that is what people like Henry George had no concept of, and which why people, I think Paul Krugman was a reader for a book that Yale University Press wanted me to publish. Oh, the first edition of Killing the Host. And he said, oh, obviously this guy is a follower of Henry George. Well, I loathe Henry George because he didn't have a price and value theory. He was against the big government without realizing that the only way you're ever going to be able to tax the rentiers, the only way you're ever able to make money and credit a public utility instead of a private monopoly is to have a government strong enough to check the oligarchy. And of course, that's what the collapse of antiquity is all about. That's really the problem of Western civilization. And so while what David was doing in his book, and where we both were at the time he was writing it and afterwards, was saying, well, you know, there's if you look at anthropology, look at all the damage that debt does, look at through the ages, how societies cope with debt. I don't think either of us made the logical jump to say, this is the path that Western civilization went on that became a unique, totally new detour around the 8th century BC. And ever since, we're still living in the aftermath of Rome's oligarchy and the creditor-oriented law that it developed. So I really developed my own ideas quite further when I began to write the book on antiquity, and just to a higher level of abstraction. And then when I began to look at the Crusades and find how awful they were, you know, I'd forgotten what evil the Vatican had been in the early centuries, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. I mean, right down to the, I guess I could say down to last week. I just forgot the utter evil of the popes and trying to be emperors, and it was the Crusades that brought in the Inquisition. The Crusades, I just looked at the Wikipedia discussion of the Crusades, and people think the Crusades were to free the Holy Land, Jerusalem, from the Muslims. That wasn't it. The Crusades were against Christians. The Crusades was to kill the French Cathars. who said that, the rich people are evil. No, that's our constituency. To fight the German kings who said we want to be independent of the popes and we don't want the churches to be send all their money to Rome to fund the wars against people that don't want Roman leadership. The Crusades were to destroy Constantinople and to destroy the Eastern Orthodox, the real Christianity, the Eastern Orthodox Christianity that had survived. The Crusades were to introduce what I don't know what you'd call it, but it was not Christianity. I guess that's why the Pope has not invited me to help him write a new encyclical on this topic. But that really is what's needed. And I realized that it was the Crusades that led to the Pope saying, well, we've got to finance the wars so that we can fight Germany, France, Spain, Sicily, that doesn't accept our dictatorship. And in order to fund these wars, we need bank support. So let's get rid of all of the church's anti-usury law. Let's say credit is good, not bad. It's like the Animal Farm with Orwell. It's like the doublethink. All of a sudden, a total inversion of everything that Christianity was about. And you get the key to this inversion, as I say at the end of the Collapse of Antiquity, with the Lord's Prayer, saying, forgive us our sins. In other words, don't screw around sexually. Instead of forgive us our debts. It's just a travesty of mistranslation that Western Christianity suffered for the last 1,000 years. All that comes from the Crusades. So, at any rate, that hadn't occurred to me until I actually began to study St. Augustine. And as Peter Brown, the biography of Augustine, and that basically the 5th century pointed out, it was really Augustine that founded the spirit of the Inquisition. Although it didn't really come through until the Dominicans did it. To basically, you can't. What the Dominicans realized, and the genius of the popes was, you can't have Christianity unless you're willing to kill everybody who can read the Bible. You have to prevent it from being translated so people can read it, because if they read the Bible, they're going to realize that what we are is the opposite of everything that Jesus was fighting for. And yet, I was supported by all of the various Christian groups. They were sending me across the country to lecture. So there was a kind of thinking in the late 1960s and early 70s that somehow there was some hope for Christianity. But again, that was before the Pope from hell. The Polish Pope came in, and the German Pope from hell that followed him, and before the Catholic Church was captured by the Spanish fascists. I hope I haven't offended anybody.
No, probably not here. No. Thank you for that. I want to bring us up to more up to date. The last chapter in Debt is about, I believe the title is something like, where, post 1971 into an environment that we have yet to know what it's going to be like. One of the things that's so wonderful about your work is that you've shown how historically the battle isn't really between democracy and anti-democracy. The battle is really between oligarchy and autocracy. And one of the points that Graeber makes in the last chapter is that now that we've gone off the gold standard and we're decoupling ourselves from bullion, and we're going to a more virtual credit-oriented kind of economy, that in Graeber's mind, it allows for the opportunity of greater, it creates a possibility for less violence. It doesn't necessarily guarantee it, but if these historical patterns are accurate, it will at least open up a possibility. Yet one of the things that he says elsewhere in his writings, like There Never Was a West, he says that there are really two conditions to democracy. One, that you've got to have people who want to act democratically, that, that there's basically an assumption that pluralism's better than one person rule. But then you also, he argues, you've got to have a strong government in order to bring about the kinds of changes that democratic change implies. I'm wondering if you could comment on that, if you feel equally optimistic about the possibilities that are out there now that we've gone away from a gold standard, because your work seems to suggest that not necessarily. And so I'm wondering if you could comment on that in light of the post-1971 world and what Graeber argues in the last chapter.
Well, that's sort of a trick question. The concept of democracy and autocracy today has gone way beyond what it was even 5 years ago. And especially now that President Biden has said the world is divided into democracy, meaning American autocracy, and autocracy meaning China, which means rulers supporting what's good for the people as a whole. So the value of studying classical antiquity is you realize that Aristotle was very clear that democracy evolves into oligarchy. And what the oligarchy wants to do is prevent any kind of central power strong enough to challenge its control of society. So they called in Greece, any reformer wanting to have a strong enough ruler to cancel the debts and redistribute the land was called a tyrant, because that's what the tyrants did. And they were in the 7th and 6th century BC. Well, the tyrants were who introduced democracy to Greece. They were the people who got rid of the mafiosi type leaders and canceled the debts and redistributed the land. So all of a sudden, tyrant became a bad word, sort of like communist. Not a good word. And in Rome, anyone wanting to cancel the debts and redistribute the land, like Julius Caesar or the Catiline, were called seeking kingship. And again, what did a king do? The Roman kings, according to the Roman historians, had canceled the debts and supported access to the land by the people. And in the Bible, when the Jewish rabbinical class, the creditor class, the Pharisees, wanted Rome to crucify Jesus, they said, well, he wants to be king, king of the Jews. Well, they knew that for Rome, saying somebody wanted to be king is to do what Jesus said his mission in life was to do, to bring about the debt cancellation of the Jubilee year and to restore the laws of Leviticus against the rabbinical school wanting people to sign the prose bull of Rabbi Hillel, where you waived all of the rights under the Jubilee year. So the fact is that as long the idea of pluralism and everybody sort of at the same level, the internal economic dynamics are such that democracy leads to oligarchy, and so democracy is essentially ends up leading to what you have in the United States today. It's led to finance capitalism overpowering the progressive tendencies of industrial capitalism. So that's why when you have China, the Communist Party of China, trying to support policies to raise productivity, raise living standards, provide healthcare, education, transportation as basic public utilities, that's called autocracy. And the American will say, well, under a democracy, you have to have a free market, meaning you have to let the American oligarchs buy control of your transportation. You have to make America banks create your money at interest. You can't have public banking. You can't have a central bank creating money. You need that to be a private monopoly. That's democracy. And that's what the whole term means today. So I think it turns out well, that's how I tried to end the collapse of antiquity by making that point, and it certainly is what we're facing today. And what I'm doing in analyzing today's economy is saying you're having a fight by the 1% to take control over all of the economic surplus that exists. And in order to do that, it has to capture the government or prevent any government from being strong enough to check the 1% from succeeding in reducing the rest of the economy to debt peonage.
I see that Simona has her hand up. Simona?
Yes, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Michael. It's really an honor to be able to speak with you. I have a perplexity about an important point that David makes in depth about virtual money. He says virtual money opens the possibilities for less violence. But
wait, what opens it? What's the word that you use?
Gives us a chance to enable a system with less violence or without violence. He says credit money historically led to systems based on trust. Nevertheless, I'm under the impression that this virtual money we have today is for the first time in history of virtual money that can be based on violence rather than trust. Credit money is based on trust between each other, and what we have today, I hope I'm able to explain myself, is something that ranges in long distance, is impersonal, while I think the credit money David was talking about was personal, was based on personal relationships and therefore not violent. So this is something you may be able to clarify me because
well, it's surprising as it is, the people who are willing to kill other people are the people who do not earn their money and do not produce things. The actual people who are being exploited. The workers are not willing to kill their exploiters, but the exploiters are willing to kill any leaders of the workers who threaten their free lunch, who threaten their rentier gains, who threaten their appropriation of public wealth and public utilities to privatize them. So it's the privatizers that are violent, it's the exploiters that are violent, not the victims. That's I guess that's part of nature. So how do you deal with the fact that you have the CIA going about assassinating any national leader who wants to be independent from the Americans, from Lumumba to, right down the lines of all the CIA assassinations of social democratic leaders in Europe and Latin America, the support of Pinochet. The exploiters are willing to use violence and assassination, and this goes right back to Rome. The whole history of Rome is century after century of assassinating any political leader who advocated debt cancellation and land redistribution. The Gracchi, I mean, that's part of what you see, and the Roman people who are losing their land were never really able to succeed in fighting back. So the financial leaders, the property, the wealthiest population who makes their wealth hereditary and inherit it instead of creating it are the ones who create violence to defend what is basically unfair. If you make wealth or assets unfairly, you kill to keep it. But if it's taken from you unfairly, you tend not to be willing to kill because you believe in fairness. That's it's a whole different ethic between the 1% and the 99%, and that's what makes democracy lose out to oligarchy every time throughout history.
Nika?
Yes, thank you so much, Michael, for coming. Yeah, I just really so grateful to you, and I'm very happy that this is the last session of our season for Museum of Care. So I have a question to you. Like you were saying that you're more futurist rather than economist. So can you tell us how the world may look like if suddenly the debt cancellation everywhere would happen? What would happen? So if the government will decide it, convinced by you and David and everybody else who's working on that, that's okay, we're going to do that.
Well, imagine how much more money the average family would have if it didn't have to pay its credit card debt, its automobile debt, its mortgage debt, and the other debts. It would be able to spend money on the products that wage earners produce. Imagine what governments could do if they were not subject to IMF pressure, saying in order for you to pay your dollar bondholders, you have to impose austerity. The first thing you have to do is get rid of the labor unions. And if you can't do it peacefully, let us come in and we'll just kill the labor leaders for you. You have to sell off your public domain, sell off your oil rights, sell off your forests. We want to burn them down and grow cattle on them. You have to essentially let the financial sector become your economic planners, not the government. And as long as countries believe they have to pay the debt, then they're going to say, well, I guess we owe the debt, so we're going to have to commit economic suicide. We cannot afford to grow. Our population must shrink. We cannot afford public health care. We cannot afford education because we owe them the money. Well, to me, that's crazy. How do you get people to say, do we really need all this? Is this built into nature? Is it really true that, as Margaret Thatcher says, there is no alternative? Well, of course there's an alternative. And one of the reasons that I spent so many years on the Sumer and Babylonia and the Bronze Age was to show that there was an alternative, that alternative is how civilization actually took off very successfully. And that alternative lasted really until Western civilization brought to power a whole group of Westerners with Putin now called the Golden Billion that's willing to kill everybody else in order to prevent the kind of success that the whole rest of the world had before about the 8th century BC. Oh, I lost everybody.
Christian, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. Again, thank you. It's quite an honor to be able to talk to you here in this forum. And I mean, if you look at the collapse of antiquity, like these events that played out over a large frame of time, it took centuries. You describe centuries of civil war, of creditor-debtor standoffs, and still the Roman oligarchy prevailed, you know, in spite of, in a way, hollowing out. I mean, this is also part of your theme, you know, when you say it's killing the host. The system is killing the host. I mean, you wrote an entire book on this, and but still, you know, despite this machine managed to go on for centuries, despite all the resistance, and only, it seems, when it had hollowed itself out to a point where it couldn't sustain itself anymore, like the barbarians came in and knocked over the empty husk. I mean, I think many of us here in this group and other people are looking for an alternative. And in a way, I'm wondering if, on the one hand, you have to be just lucky enough to be alive when the cycle turns, or that's it,
Yep.
you have to just wait, or is there something more? You know, is this like, because all these centuries of resistance have to mount up to something. At least I would hope to, you know.
Well, timing is all important, and around 1980, at the end of the 70s, I realized that this is just at the point where you had Drexel Burnham come in. Many of my friends worked there. You had Wall Street starting the whole sort of debt leverage takeover movement. I realized that there wasn't going to be a debt cancellation in the foreseeable future, that you're going to have just the opposite. You're going to have economies loaded down with debt. Well, that's when I decided, okay, what am I going to do for the next 10 or 20 years? That's when I decided to do my historical work, because it's obvious that this was not, that anything that I would come out with doing what David was trying to do, which is spur a debt cancellation, wasn't going to go very far in the 1980s. So that's when I joined Harvard and put together my Harvard group in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And it's only now that you're finally reaching the point where the economies reach the debt limits, just like you have the environment reaching its global warming limits and its pollution limits. You're having the COVID crisis reaching, you know, how many people can be paralyzed with long COVID. You're having debt pollution. Essentially reaching the limits, and the US and European economies cannot grow. And I think the US planners recognize this. I said, okay, at least if we can't grow, at least we can make sure we can exploit our colonies in Europe. And so Europe is going to be the victim of American economic exploitation for the next 10 years. And I think you're going to have France and Germany and Italy are going to end up looking like Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia, and their population is going to be going way down. You're going to see Nobel prizes given for saying that every economy should look at our ideal, Ukraine. That's our ideal. Privatize everything, sell it off, get rid of the population, make them move somewhere else. We don't need people to exploit the agriculture and the raw materials. That's the road for the future for Europe. And it's as if the plans at the end of World War II to make Germany into a sort of happy farmland agricultural economy, roll back the industry. Nobody was able to do that in 1945, but President Biden is able to do it today. He's able to say America's been able to deindustrialize Germany and essentially roll it back and make it into a pastoral farming sort of theme park. So here you have an ability of the United States to keep burning up the European economy, to keep itself going. And the question is, how are you going to get the rest of the world, the global majority, apart from the golden billion, the other sort of 85% of the population, to be able to follow a different alternative, and essentially the alternative that industrial capitalism promised to have in the 19th century, according to the classical economists, and to resist the financialization and the rentier economy that has made a hereditary oligarchy in the West. Well, you're beginning to see that, but no country, certainly you're not having China make any attempt at all to proselytize its economic policy, its economic model. There's nothing like the world communist movement in the early 20th century. There's no systematic alternative being put forth, certainly not by the labor parties or the social democratic parties of Europe or North America. So really, I guess all of us together have to promote, we have to create a critical mass of an understanding of why the economy isn't working, why it's polarizing between the 1% and the 99%, and how to actually create this alternative. I don't see it being able to be created in the United States. It looks like it'll be created much more easily in Eurasia and the global South, simply because the existing society is so debt-ridden that it simply cannot go any further along the lines that it's presently structured.
Excuse me, I see that it's almost 4 o'clock. Are you willing,
Sure.
Professor Hudson, to entertain one more question?
Sure.
Okay.
I didn't know there was a time limit on it.
Well, I mean, you know, I want to be respectful of your time.
Right.
Michael, I see that you have a question. Would you like to ask?
Yeah, so I've got an easy name to remember, Michael. My name's Michael also. I was just kind of going back to Simona's question at the beginning in terms of we've been going through this book, Debt, and one of David Graeber's theses is that when you have this interpersonal credit, people, like, even if you're counting the money that you need to give to people, because people have to do that face to face in a small scenario, then it's not really a bad situation. You don't have huge accumulation of debt in this type of microeconomics of a community. And then so it goes with when you had these gold coins, he's arguing that gold coins in the axial age suddenly create a situation where you don't really need an interpersonal exchange. You could just take your money and go. And so it goes on arguing that in the sort of beginning of capitalism is this alliance between bankers and the Spaniards who went and had to, and the money that they gave to the Venetian, Genoan bankers, they had to pay it back. And so they were basically willing to do anything because they were in debt. And he's then arguing that there's this alliance between the banking system and war. And then at the final chapter, which is sort of what we sort of have been discussing, but then we're very excited that you're here to talk about stuff. It's called The Beginning of Something Yet to Be Determined. And he decides to say, oh, look, here's the year that they came off the gold standard. So, and we've been sort of debating about whether or not this conflation of this axial age idea that gold coinage was a crucial part of building a cycle of and being able to pay for war and depersonalizing the economy and allowing debts to be done in a particular way, and that and then the collapse of gold coinage came in the Middle Ages. And I think people have all thought, oh, well, because there wasn't this ability to create an alliance between the bankers and the people financing war, that somehow the Middle Ages were better. And so obviously the Middle Ages were very hierarchical and there were some wars. So I want so it's hard. So these are the sort of the big, broad brushstroke pictures that David is sort of painting in his book. And we were trying to kind of put a bunch of them together. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what the coming off the gold standard in 1971 and how if the collapse of the use of gold coins at the end of the axial age ultimately heralded a slightly different type of economy, what does the collapse of the gold standard indicate now, or do you not think so, or how long would it take? Maybe you could comment on.
The collapse of the gold standard means nothing for this. I think what David was talking about in the example you said, as I said, he's sort of a people person. He was talking about relationships among people. His point of reference was the anthropology, the chapters that he wrote in Madagascar and the other places about how the original debts were interpersonal debts, not corporate debts or government debt. His solution of interpersonal debts doesn't apply to government debt or corporate debt or large scale, billion-dollar, million-dollar type loans. So he's not talking about the whole economy. He essentially is using the interpersonal debt as a kind of metaphor. Wouldn't it be nice if all of society were more or less cooperative like that? But that I think your description of the Middle Ages is not accurate at all. I don't like the term axial age. I don't even know what it is. I don't think serious people like that idea anymore. You had it was the Vatican that organized lenders in they're called Cahorzines or Lombards. They were northern Italy and transalpine creditors that the Vatican would, the popes would organize in the 13th century to make loans to the English kings and other local kings to pay the papacy so that it could finance the wars to fight against the Christian kingdoms. So you can think of the Middle Ages as the war of the papacy against Christianity. That's basically what it was. And it was the popes that, how do you fight a war? You need credit in order to, as wars became more and more expensive. And so this credit, it was indeed still in gold and silver, in commodity money, that arranged financing. The debts, the big debtors in the 12th and 13th century were not the poor as they were in Greece and Rome. The debtors were the kings and the churches. The debtors were at the top of the economic pyramid, not the bottom. And they were sanctified in paying interest because they were fighting for something that the popes wanted, to kill other Christians who didn't agree with the Roman travesty of Christianity. So as long as you were killing the Christians for Rome, that was considered sanctimonious, and that led, the only way that you could have a strong king, such as Philip IV of France, come in was to, well, he could lower the silver content of the livre tournois and adulterate the coinage. Well, that didn't work very much, but at least after the Crusades were over, the papacy didn't have an organizing principle, an evangelistic principle to say, let's kill the enemy, the foreigners. It's as if Joseph Goebbels went back and became the main advisor to the papacy and said, all you need to do to get the people on your side is to say you're under attack. So you had 1095 and 6, the Pope saying, well, we're under attack by the Muslims. And the Muslims weren't attacking anybody. There was the rest of the world in the 11th and 12th century, religions in Spain, in Sicily, in the Near East, there were Christians and Jews and Eastern Orthodox Christians and Roman Christians. There was a tolerant, multi-ethnic society. And the Romans said, you can't be multi-ethnic. You must kill everybody who is different from the world that we want to control for Jesus. You have this spilled out in the papal dictates of 1074 and then the Great Schism. So it was really, it was from the very beginning, the papacy organized formal debts and sponsored interest-bearing debts in order to pay for wars. The big change came from really with the Bank of England in 1694, where you had beginning to have paper money, and government debt became the basis of the monetary system. And ever since the 17th century, you've had debt becoming the key to money, not really gold or silver, gold or silver was used for settling international balances among governments, among central banks, as there were, but they're not used domestically. Money wasn't used that much domestically, except at harvest time in the medieval times. Money was only used basically to pay debts. And gold and silver were used to pay international debts. So when the world when America pulled the world off the gold exchange standard in 1971, what did it replace it with? With paper money or electronic money that was the monetized U.S. military spending abroad. That's the whole thesis. That's what my charts in Super-Imperialism show. So you didn't make essentially a great peaceful progress by getting rid of gold. You made American military spending the source of dollars that became the world's central bank reserves. So what David said was how early anthropology societies dealt only with interpersonal debts, and the one you didn't want to bankrupt the neighbor. You wanted to make debts not interfere with ongoing just social balance. He said that's the kind of world we need today. We need not to let debts interfere with social balance, and you can have that in interpersonal debts, but he never said you could have that with corporate debt, with industrial debt, with government debt, which is mainly to finance war. His idea was you want to get rid of that kind of debt. Or if you do have that kind of debt, you want the government to create money as a public utility, and it's a credit extended by the government without real debt. And if the debt can't be paid by a corporation, China, when there's a company that can't pay its debt, it doesn't foreclose and break it up and fire everybody and sell off the parts. It writes down the debts so that it's not going to interrupt society. I think that's the kind of continuity that David was talking about. And he said, wouldn't it be nice if you could have this interpersonal debt among individuals, but that solving the individual debt problem does not solve the government debt problem, or the fact that the bank problem, that money creation is private in the hands of a financial class, because the financial class today is just as lethal and destructive of the population as overt military conquest would be. Finance has been imperialized. Or you could say imperialism has been financialized. That really is the key. So you have to look at the whole world economy as a broad system. And David wasn't trying to deal with that. He was trying to at least outline here, it doesn't have to be this way. Here's the kind of ideal, but so far you only have this in local interpersonal relationships. Do you agree, Nika?
Not really, not really, and I really want to ask questions, but maybe, yeah, I think we should maybe continue in the next season with Christian and everybody else, because yes, of course, David, I totally disagree.
Disagree.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't want to be an idealist. What can I say?
Yeah, but it doesn't matter that I disagree. It's really interesting what you're saying, and it's a real framework for the discussion and thinking about real
governments that owe debts to each other are not going to be nice to each other as the people that David was talking about in Madagascar.
If someone else, unfortunately, I have to run to another appointment. I'm in the United States and I'm still technically in my workday. If someone's willing to take over the facilitation, Michael or Christian, I'm comfortable. If others are with the conversation going on, I do have to run to another meeting, so I'm happy passing things over.
No, but I think we should wrap up things because I think we should we're planning now the whole series of reading group related to Michael Hudson, because his book is essential for the whole core of the ideas that we're trying to discuss and research. So I don't think we should just drag this particular conversation. So maybe I will ask Stephen to wrap it up.
To wrap it up, okay. So thank you everyone for coming. This has been a wonderful experience for me. I hope it's been productive and helpful, perhaps therapeutic on your end. It's certainly been a delight for me to be able to go over the book with others, to chew on it, but then especially to just have all of the input from everyone and all of your questions, and then to be able to have Michael Hudson here to join us on our final reading group for this book. It's been just a real treat. So again, Professor Hudson, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone else, be on the lookout for future reading groups. We're of course not going anywhere, and we've still, visit the Museum of Care webpage because we have lots of events coming in the future. So we will take the summer off from reading groups, but lots of things still going on. So thank you everyone, and I look forward to seeing you down the road.
Thanks
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.